In the autumn of 1998, two experienced hikers entered the Blackstone Mountain wilderness for a 3-day trek. They carried enough supplies, filed a detailed route plan, and promised to return by Sunday evening. They never did. For 25 years, their disappearance remained one of the most baffling missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest. No bodies, no evidence, no answers. Until a routine trail maintenance crew made a discovery that would unearth secrets far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. What they found didn't just solve the mystery. It revealed that some disappearances are worse than death. If you're drawn to mysteries that refuse to let go, consider subscribing. Sometimes the truth is buried for a reason. The forest ranger's hand trembled as he held the radio to his lips. Behind him, the maintenance crew stood frozen, their faces pale in the dappled morning light filtering through the towering pines. At their feet, the earth had been scraped away, revealing something that shouldn't exist, something that made even the most seasoned outdoorsmen feel their stomachs turn. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Collins at Blackstone Trail, mile marker 7, he said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need police, forensics, and probably the FBI. We've found something related to the Morrison case." The radio crackled. "Copy that. Can you describe what you found?" Collins looked down at the structure emerging from the ground, its entrance partially concealed by decades of forest growth. The wooden frame was still intact, preserved by the cool, dry conditions beneath the mountain. But it was what they'd seen inside, through the gap they'd accidentally created while clearing a fallen tree, that had stopped them all cold. "It's an underground chamber," he said slowly, "constructed deliberately, and there are items inside. Personal effects, clothing." He paused, his throat tight, and what appears to be a journal. He didn't mention the other things they'd glimpsed in that first horrified moment. The rusted chains, the scratches on the wooden walls, deep gouges that could only have been made by human fingernails, or the way the chamber had been designed with an elaborate ventilation system, suggesting that whoever built it intended for someone to remain alive down there for a very long time. 25 years ago, Sarah and Michael Morrison had walked into these woods. Now perhaps they were about to tell their story. But as Collins stared into that dark opening, he wondered if some stories were meant to stay buried. The coffee had gone cold in Jennifer Morrison's hand, but she didn't notice. She sat at her kitchen table in Portland, staring at her phone screen, rereading the message from the Washington State Police for the 4th time. After 25 years of silence, 3 words had shattered her carefully constructed morning. "We found something." She was 53 now, though people often told her she looked older. Grief aged you in ways that time alone never could. When her brother Michael and his girlfriend Sarah had vanished, Jennifer had been 28, newly married, with her whole life stretching ahead. Now she was divorced, her daughter grown and living in Boston, and the missing piece of her heart had calcified into a dull, persistent ache she'd learned to carry. "Mom?" Her daughter Emma's voice came through the phone speaker. Jennifer had called her immediately after hanging up with the detective. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," Jennifer said, her voice distant. She rose from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the overcast Portland sky. Rain was coming. It was always coming in October, just like it had been that weekend in 1998, when Michael and Sarah had set out for what should have been a simple hiking trip. "What did they actually say?" Emma pressed. "Did they find them? Did they find bodies?" Jennifer flinched at her daughter's directness, though she'd inherited it from her. "They wouldn't give details over the phone. Detective Walsh asked me to come to Cascade Falls. He said it was important that I see something in person." She paused, her breath fogging the window glass. "He sounded strange, Emma. Not relieved or sad. He sounded disturbed." "Do you want me to fly out? I can be there by tonight." "No," Jennifer said quickly. Then, softer, "Not yet. Let me find out what this is first. It might be nothing. It might be another false lead." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. 25 years of dead ends and cruel hoaxes had taught her to recognize the difference between hope and reality. Whatever they'd found, it was real. It was significant. And from the tension in Detective Walsh's voice, it was bad. She ended the call with Emma and walked upstairs to her bedroom, pulling a box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were the remnants of that autumn in 1998. Newspaper clippings yellowed with age. Missing person posters with Michael and Sarah's faces smiling out from them, forever young at 26 and 25. Police reports, search party schedules, and beneath it all, the last birthday card Michael had sent her, arriving 2 days after he'd disappeared. "Looking forward to Thanksgiving at your place, Jen. Sarah and I have big news to share. Love you." She'd never learned what that news was. The prevailing theory among the family had been an engagement, though Sarah's parents had quietly suggested she might have been pregnant. Either way, the future Michael and Sarah had been planning had died with them on that mountain. Jennifer pulled out a photograph, one of her favorites. It showed Michael and Sarah at the Columbia River Gorge, taken just months before their disappearance. They stood on a rocky outcrop, arms around each other, the vast wilderness stretching behind them. Michael's dark hair was wind-blown, his grin wide and infectious. Sarah, petite and blonde, leaned into him with complete trust, her green eyes sparkling with laughter. They looked invincible. They looked like nothing could touch them, but something had. The drive to Cascade Falls took 3 hours. Jennifer barely registered the passing scenery, her mind cycling through possibilities. Had they fallen? Been attacked by an animal? Gotten lost and succumbed to exposure? She'd imagined every scenario 1,000 times over the years, each one more painful than the last. The not knowing had been its own special torture, keeping her suspended in a permanent state of grief without resolution. Detective Richard Walsh met her at the police station, a low brick building on the edge of the small mountain town. He was in his early 60s, with steel-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. But when he shook her hand, Jennifer saw something in his eyes she'd never seen in any of the previous investigators. Genuine discomfort, bordering on fear. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Ms. Morrison," he said, guiding her into a small conference room. Another woman waited inside, younger, with sharp features and an FBI badge clipped to her belt. "This is Special Agent Reeves," Walsh said as they sat. "She's been assigned to the case given what we've discovered." "What have you discovered?" Jennifer asked, her patience exhausted. "Please, just tell me. Are they dead? Did you find their bodies?" Walsh and Reeves exchanged a glance. It was Reeves who spoke first. "Ms. Morrison, a trail maintenance crew was clearing fallen timber yesterday when they discovered a concealed structure approximately 7 miles into the Blackstone Trail. The structure is a deliberately constructed underground chamber." Jennifer's heart began to pound. "What kind of chamber?" "A containment room," Walsh said quietly. "Built sometime in the late 90s, we believe. It's approximately 10 by 12 feet. Reinforced with timber framing and buried about 6 feet below the surface. It has a ventilation system, a door that locks from the outside, and evidence of long-term occupancy." The room tilted slightly. Jennifer gripped the edge of the table. "You're saying someone took them? Someone kept them there?" "We found personal items belonging to your brother and Ms. Sarah Chen," Reeves said. "Michael's wallet, Sarah's driver's license, and several pieces of clothing that match what they were wearing when they disappeared. We also found a journal." "A journal?" Jennifer whispered. Walsh pushed a clear evidence bag across the table. Inside was a small notebook, its cover water-stained and warped, the pages brown with age. Even through the plastic, Jennifer could see handwriting on the visible page. Neat, small letters written in what looked like pencil. "Is that Sarah's writing?" "We believe so," Reeves said. "The journal contains entries spanning several weeks. We haven't read all of it yet. But Miss Morrison," What we have read suggests that your brother and Ms. Chen survived for at least a month after their disappearance. The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Survived. For a month. In that underground chamber. While search parties had combed the mountains, while their families had held vigils and distributed flyers, while Jennifer had lain awake night after night praying for their safe return. They'd been there. Alive. Trapped. Suffering. Who did this? She asked, her voice breaking. Who took them? Who built that place? That's what we're trying to determine, Walsh said. The structure shows signs of careful planning and construction. Whoever built it had knowledge of the area, of construction, and of how to conceal something in wilderness terrain. They also had time. This wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated. Jennifer stared at the journal, at Sarah's handwriting frozen in time. 25 years ago, Sarah had held that pencil, had written those words while trapped in darkness beneath the earth, and Jennifer hadn't known. No one had known. No one had come. I need to read it, she said. I need to know what happened to them. Reeves' expression softened with something close to sympathy. Ms. Morrison, I should prepare you. The content is extremely disturbing. Sarah documented not just their captivity, but psychological torture, deprivation, and ultimately what we believe are the circumstances of their deaths. I don't care, Jennifer said, meeting the agent's eyes. They're my family. They went through it. The least I can do is bear witness to it. After a long moment, Reeves nodded slowly. Then let's start at the beginning, she said, opening a file folder. Let's start with the day they disappeared and work forward, because Ms. Morrison, what happened to your brother and Sarah Chen is going to require you to understand something very dark about human nature, and about the person who did this to them. The conference room had taken on the quality of a confessional, the fluorescent lights harsh against the lengthening afternoon shadows outside. Jennifer sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea someone had brought her, though she hadn't taken a single sip. Before her on the table lay a timeline that Detective Walsh had constructed, a map of the Blackstone Trail, and several photographs of the underground chamber that made her stomach clench. Let's start with what we know about their last confirmed movements, Walsh said, pulling the timeline closer. October 9th, 1998, approximately 9 a.m. Michael and Sarah checked out of the Cascade Falls Motel. They'd stayed there the previous night, arriving from Portland around 6 p.m. The desk clerk remembered them as friendly, excited about their hike. They'd been planning it for months, Jennifer said quietly. Michael had just gotten a promotion at the engineering firm. Sarah was finishing her graduate thesis in environmental science. They'd been working so hard. This was supposed to be their reward, a weekend away before everything got busy again. Reeves made a note in her file. Did they mention meeting anyone? Planning to hike with anyone else? No, it was just the two of them. They wanted it that way. Jennifer paused, a memory surfacing. Michael did say something odd, though, when I talked to him the night before they left. He said they'd been given a trail recommendation by someone who really knew the area. Walsh leaned forward. Do you remember who? Jennifer shook her head, frustrated. I didn't ask. I was distracted. My daughter had just started kindergarten, and I was dealing with some issues at work. I just said that sounded nice and told him to be careful. The guilt that had lived in her chest for 25 years intensified. Such a small thing, not asking a simple follow-up question. But small things, she'd learned, could mean everything. They signed in at the trailhead at 10:15 a.m., Walsh continued, pointing to the log entry in one of his files. The ranger on duty remembered them, said they seemed well prepared, had proper gear, and filed a detailed itinerary. They planned to hike 7 miles in, camp at Blackstone Creek, then summit Blackstone Peak on day 2 before returning on day 3. But they never made it to Blackstone Creek, Jennifer said, studying the map. No, Walsh confirmed. The underground chamber is located at approximately mile marker 7, but it's about 200 yards off the main trail. There's a small footpath that branches off, barely visible unless you know what you're looking for. It leads to what appears to be a scenic overlook. Jennifer's chest tightened. A trap. Possibly, Reeves said. Or they were led there by someone they trusted, someone who knew about that location. Walsh pulled out another set of photographs, these showing the interior of the chamber. Jennifer forced herself to look, though every instinct screamed at her to turn away. The space was small and dark, the walls rough timber. A bucket sat in one corner. In another, a pile of what appeared to be blankets, now moldy and deteriorated. And everywhere, those scratches on the walls, dozens of them, like a prisoner marking days, except more frantic, more desperate. The forensic team has been processing the scene since yesterday, Reeves explained. What we've learned is that the chamber was constructed with significant skill. The ventilation system is surprisingly sophisticated, using a series of concealed pipes that surface at various points upslope, camouflaged to look like natural rock formations. The door is reinforced, opens outward, and has a complex locking mechanism on the outside. Someone could have walked right past this and never known it was here, Walsh added grimly. In fact, we believe people did. The search parties in 1998 covered this area, but there was no visible indication of the chamber's existence. The entrance was concealed beneath a false forest floor, complete with transplanted vegetation. Jennifer swallowed hard. You're saying whoever built this spent months preparing it? This wasn't opportunistic. They were waiting for the right victims. That's our working theory, Reeves confirmed. The location is remote, but not so far from the trail that it would be impossible to transport someone there against their will. It's also in a natural depression, which would muffle sound. Even if Michael or Sarah had screamed, no one would have heard them from the main trail. Tell me about the journal, Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. When did Sarah start writing? Reeves opened another evidence bag, this one containing photocopies of the journal pages. The original was still being processed for fingerprints and DNA, but they'd made copies for the investigation. She slid the first page across to Jennifer. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's, neat and controlled despite the circumstances. Jennifer remembered Sarah's graduate school notebooks, always precisely organized, color-coded, methodical. That methodical nature had apparently persisted even in captivity. The first entry is dated October 10th, Reeves said softly, the day after they disappeared. Jennifer read the words, and they cut through her like broken glass. Day 1. Michael is injured, hit on the head from behind when we reached the overlook. I wasn't hurt, just grabbed. There were 2 of them, I think, though I only saw one face clearly before they put the hood over my head. We woke up here, in this place underground. Michael can barely stand. His pupils are unequal. I think he has a concussion. The door is locked. There's a bucket for waste, bottles of water, some kind of protein bars, and a battery-powered lantern. Nothing else, no way out. Michael keeps asking where we are. I don't know what to tell him. Jennifer's vision blurred with tears. She blinked them back, forcing herself to keep reading as Reeves turned to the next page. Day 2. Someone came during the night. We heard the locks being undone, saw light from above. A figure in a mask looked down at us. Didn't speak. Just watched us for maybe 5 minutes. Then closed the door and locked it again. Michael tried to climb up, to reach the door, but it's too high, at least 8 feet, and he's too dizzy from the head injury. We've been calling for help, screaming until our voices are raw. No one comes, no one hears. There are 37 entries total, Walsh said quietly. The last one is dated November 16th. That's 38 days after they disappeared. 38 days. Jennifer did the math mechanically, her mind unable to process the full horror of it. 38 days while she'd been going through the motions of her life. 38 days while she'd held out hope they'd simply gotten lost, would be found safe, would come home. They'd been alive for more than a month, and no one had known. No one had found them. The entries become increasingly desperate, Reeves continued, her professional mask slipping slightly to reveal genuine distress. Sarah documents their captors' visits, which became more frequent and more psychologically sadistic. Food and water were provided, but erratically. Sometimes the person would leave them in darkness for days. Other times, they'd keep the lantern burning constantly, preventing sleep. There was no pattern they could predict. No demands? Jennifer asked. No ransom, no explanation, nothing? None that Sarah recorded, Walsh said. Whoever took them didn't want money or to make a political statement. They wanted the suffering itself. Jennifer felt something cold settle in her stomach. How did they die? The two investigators exchanged another glance. It was becoming a pattern Jennifer hated. The forensic anthropologist is still examining the remains. Reeves said carefully, but based on the final journal entries and the physical evidence, we believe they died of dehydration and starvation. The last entry indicates their captor had stopped coming, stopped bringing supplies. Sarah wrote that they'd had no food for 6 days, no water for 3. Jennifer closed her eyes, but the horror followed her into darkness. She imagined Sarah, always so precise and careful, measuring out their dwindling resources. Michael, protective and strong, growing weaker, unable to save the woman he loved. Both of them knowing they were going to die, that no rescue was coming, that they would end their lives in that dark hole beneath the earth while the world above them continued on. Oblivious. I need to know who did this, Jennifer said, opening her eyes. The grief had crystallized into something harder, something with edges. I need to understand who could do something like this to 2 innocent people. We're investigating several possibilities, Walsh said. The construction of the chamber suggests someone with building experience, someone who knew the land. We're looking at property records, examining who owned land in this area in the late 90s, who had the skills and opportunity. But there's something else, Reeves said, her tone shifting. Something we discovered in the chamber that changes the nature of this investigation. She pulled out another photograph. This one showed a section of the timber wall, and carved into it, barely visible but unmistakable, were words. Jennifer leaned forward, squinting at the image. They weren't the first. Sarah wrote that, Jennifer breathed. No, Walsh said grimly. Those carvings are older, weathered differently than the scratches Michael and Sarah made. We believe they were left by previous victims. Ms. Morrison, we don't think your brother and Sarah were this person's first prey. We think they were continuing a pattern that may have started years, possibly decades, earlier. The room seemed to contract around Jennifer. You're saying there are other victims? Other families who never got answers? We're investigating, Reeves said. But yes, that's the implication. And if there are other victims, their remains might still be out there, in similar chambers, waiting to be found. Jennifer stared at the photograph, at those words carved by someone else's desperate hand. Someone who'd been where Michael and Sarah had been, who'd suffered as they suffered, who died alone in the dark. And somewhere, that person had family too. People who'd spent years wondering, grieving, searching for answers that were buried beneath the forest floor. Find them, Jennifer said, her voice hard. Find whoever did this, and find the others. They deserve to be brought home too. Jennifer didn't return to Portland that night. Instead, she checked into the same motel where Michael and Sarah had stayed their last night alive, though she didn't realize it until the desk clerk mentioned it while processing her credit card. The woman, now in her 60s, had worked there for 30 years and remembered the young couple who'd never come back. I felt terrible for years, the clerk said, her hands trembling slightly as she handed Jennifer the room key, thinking maybe if I'd paid more attention, noticed something off. I could have warned them. It's not your fault, Jennifer said automatically, though the words felt hollow. Wasn't everyone who'd crossed paths with Michael and Sarah that weekend carrying some measure of misplaced guilt? The ranger who'd watched them sign the trail register, the hikers who'd passed them on the path, the search party volunteers who'd walked within yards of their underground prison without knowing. Guilt was easier than accepting the truth. That evil could be so carefully hidden that even vigilant people missed it. The room was generic, identical to 1,000 other motel rooms across America. Jennifer sat on the bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos Detective Walsh had given her permission to take. She'd spent 3 more hours at the police station, reading through Sarah's journal entries until her eyes burned and her throat ached from suppressed sobs. Now, alone, she let herself process what she'd learned. The entries painted a portrait of disintegration, not just physical but psychological. Sarah had remained analytical at first, documenting everything with scientific precision. She'd measured the dimensions of their prison, tracked the timing of their captors' visits, tried to establish patterns that might predict when food or water would come. But by the second week, the entries had changed tone. Day 12. Michael is getting weaker. The head injury won't heal properly without medical care. Sometimes he forgets where we are, thinks we're still at the motel, planning our hike. It's almost a mercy when he's confused. Better than watching him understand, over and over again, that we're trapped here, that we're probably going to die here. The person came again tonight, still wearing the mask, still silent. This time they brought a Polaroid camera. They took pictures of us. I don't understand why. Michael tried to speak to them, to beg for help, but they just watched us through those eye holes in the mask. I'm starting to think they don't see us as human. We're something else to them. An experiment. Entertainment. I don't know which is worse. Jennifer had asked about those photographs. Walsh's expression had darkened. We haven't found them yet, he'd said. But based on the journal, the perpetrator took dozens over the course of the captivity, which means they kept trophies. They wanted to remember. The horror of that had been almost paralyzing. Someone had photographs of Michael and Sarah's suffering. Might have looked at them over the years, might still have them now. Might be looking at them at this very moment, reliving what they'd done. A knock at the motel room door startled Jennifer from her thoughts. She checked the peephole and saw Agent Reeves standing in the harsh glare of the exterior light, holding a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. I saw your car in the lot, Reeves said when Jennifer opened the door. Figured you might need some company, or at least caffeine. Jennifer stepped aside, grateful despite herself. The silence had been becoming oppressive, filling with too many dark thoughts. Reeves settled into the room's single chair while Jennifer returned to the bed, accepting the coffee with a murmured thanks. Couldn't sleep either, Jennifer asked. Cases like this don't let you sleep, Reeves replied. I've worked plenty of homicides, but this one is different. The premeditation, the cruelty, the patience it took. Whoever did this isn't like typical killers we profile. What do you mean? Reeves took a sip of her coffee, choosing her words carefully. Most murderers kill for a reason we can understand, even if we find it abhorrent. Jealousy, rage, financial gain, sexual gratification. But this person built that chamber and waited for victims. They didn't know Michael and Sarah. There was no personal connection that we can find. They just wanted to watch people suffer and die slowly, and they were willing to put in months of work to make it happen. Sarah wrote about the mask, Jennifer said. That the person never spoke, never showed their face. What does that tell you? It tells me they were organized and careful. They knew that voices can be identified, that faces can be remembered. But it also tells me something else. Reeves set down her coffee and leaned forward. It tells me they might have been someone Michael and Sarah would have recognized, someone they'd met before that day. The implications of that statement settled over Jennifer like a shroud. You think they knew their killer? I think it's possible. Remember, you said Michael mentioned getting a trail recommendation from someone who knew the area. What if that someone was the perpetrator? What if they'd been watching Michael and Sarah before the hike, establishing themselves as a helpful, trustworthy figure? Jennifer thought back to the weeks before the disappearance. Had Michael mentioned anyone specific? A friendly ranger? A local resident? Her memories from 25 years ago were frustratingly vague, worn smooth by time and grief. "Walsh mentioned you're looking at property records," she said. Reeves nodded. "There are 17 properties within a 5-mile radius of the chamber site. Most are vacation cabins, a few are permanent residences. We're running background checks on everyone who owned property in that area in 1998, looking for anyone with construction experience, anyone with a criminal record, anyone who fits the profile." "What is the profile?" "Male, likely between 30 and 50 in 1998, which would make them 55 to 75 now. Physically strong enough to build and maintain the chamber. Knowledgeable about wilderness survival and terrain. Socially functional enough to blend in, because nobody reported suspicious behavior in the area." Reeves paused. "And patient. Extraordinarily patient. This person waited in those woods for the right victims, might have let dozens of hikers pass by before Michael and Sarah appeared." "Why them?" Jennifer asked, the question that had haunted her for hours. Why were they chosen? We may never know for certain, but Sarah's journal gives us a clue. She wrote that their captors seemed to study them, taking notes, bringing books about psychology and human behavior that they'd leave where Sarah could see them. It's possible they were chosen because they fit a specific type. Young, attractive, in love, with everything ahead of them. Jennifer felt bile rise in her throat. They wanted to break them, to destroy that happiness. "Yes," Reeves said softly, "and they succeeded. The final entries in Sarah's journal are barely coherent. The handwriting deteriorates, the sentences fragment. By the end, she knew they were dying, and she was documenting it for whoever might find them. If anyone ever found them." Jennifer pulled up another photo on her phone, one that Walsh had shown her near the end of their meeting. It was a close-up of the chamber wall, and carved into the wood in uneven, desperate letters was a message. "To whoever finds this, we tried to survive. We wanted to live. Please tell our families we loved them. Please tell them we fought. Sarah Chen and Michael Morrison. November 1998. She knew no one would find them in time, Jennifer said, her voice breaking. But she hoped someone would find them eventually. She wanted us to know what happened. And now we do, Reeves said. Which means we have a responsibility to finish this, to find who did it, and to find any other victims who might still be out there. Jennifer looked up sharply. You really think there are others? The chamber was too well constructed, too sophisticated for a first attempt. Whoever built it had practice, and that carving, they weren't the first. That's not speculation. That's testimony from someone who was there. Reeves pulled a folder from her briefcase. I've been going through cold cases, missing persons reports from the Pacific Northwest going back 40 years. I've identified 16 cases that share similar characteristics. Experienced hikers who vanished without a trace in wilderness areas. No bodies found, no evidence of foul play. Just gone. Jennifer took the folder with trembling hands. Inside were faces, dozens of them, photocopied from missing persons posters and newspaper articles. Young and old, men and women, all of them smiling in their photos because people always used happy pictures when someone went missing. All of them frozen in time, waiting to be found. 16, Jennifer whispered. That's just the ones that fit the pattern closely. There could be more. The Pacific Northwest has thousands of square miles of wilderness. If this person has been doing this for decades, there could be dozens of chambers out there. Dozens of families still waiting for answers. Jennifer stared at the faces until they blurred together. Somewhere, all these people had mothers, fathers, siblings, children who'd spent years wondering. And somewhere the person who'd put them in the ground was still alive, still free, still carrying the secret of what they'd done. We're going to find them, Jennifer said, and it wasn't a question. It was a vow. Morning came gray and cold, a low fog clinging to the valley floor and obscuring the mountains. Jennifer had barely slept. her mind churning through Sarah's journal entries and the faces in Reeves's folder. When her phone rang at 7 a.m., she was already awake, sitting at the small motel table with her fourth cup of coffee. "Ms. Morrison, it's Detective Walsh. We need you to come to the station. We've made a breakthrough." Jennifer was dressed and out the door within minutes. The police station was already busy when she arrived, officers moving with purposeful urgency. Walsh met her at the entrance, his expression grim but energized in the way of investigators who'd caught a scent. "What did you find?" Jennifer asked. "Come with me." He led her to the same conference room, where Reeves was already waiting with another man Jennifer didn't recognize. He was in his 70s, with thinning white hair and the bearing of someone who'd once held authority. "Ms. Morrison, this is Captain Henry Garrett, retired. He was the lead investigator on your brother's disappearance in 1998. Garrett extended his hand, and Jennifer saw genuine remorse in his weathered face. "I'm sorry we couldn't bring them home to you back then," he said quietly. "I've thought about your brother and Miss Chen at least once a week for the past 25 years. They deserved better than what I could give them." "You did everything you could," Jennifer said automatically, though she didn't know if it was true. "Not everything," Garrett replied, "because I missed something. We all missed something, and it's been eating at me since I heard about the chamber." He gestured to the table where a large evidence box sat. "When I retired, I kept copies of certain case files, the ones that never got solved, that stayed with me. Your brother's case was one of them. Last night, after I heard about the discovery, I went through everything again." He opened the box and pulled out a stack of photographs, police reports, and witness statements. "These are from the original investigation, search party logs, interviews with other hikers, statements from residents in the area." He spread them across the table. "And buried in here is something we should have pursued more aggressively." He pulled out a specific document, a witness statement dated October 15, 1998, 6 days after Michael and Sarah had disappeared. Jennifer leaned forward to read it. "This is from a couple named Robert and Patricia Vance," Garrett explained. "They were hiking the Blackstone Trail on October 11th, 2 days after your brother vanished. They reported seeing a man near the trail carrying construction materials, sheets of plywood, and what looked like ventilation pipes." Jennifer's pulse quickened. Did they describe him? 40s or 50s, they thought. Medium height and build, wearing work clothes and a baseball cap. They said he seemed startled to see them, then explained he was doing maintenance work for the Forestry Service. They didn't think much of it and continued their hike. "But he wasn't with the Forestry Service," Reeves said. "No," Garrett confirmed. "We checked at the time, and no one was authorized to do any construction work in that area. But we were focused on finding your brother and Ms. Chen, on searching the main trail and the areas they'd planned to visit. This seemed like a minor inconsistency, possibly just someone doing unauthorized repairs to a cabin. I noted it in my report, but didn't follow up aggressively enough." Jennifer stared at the statement, at the description of the man. He was building it, or finishing it. He was there, 2 days after he'd taken them, still working on the chamber while they were trapped inside. The room fell silent. The audacity of it was staggering. To continue construction while search parties were active in the area, while helicopters flew overhead, while missing persons posters with Michael and Sarah's faces were being distributed throughout the region. The killer had been confident enough in his concealment to return to the scene, to perfect his trap while his victims suffered beneath the earth. "The Vances," Jennifer said urgently. "Where are they now? Can they give us more details? Maybe work with a sketch artist?" Walsh's expression darkened. "Robert Vance died in 2003, but Patricia is still alive. She's in a memory care facility in Seattle. Advanced Alzheimer's. We've tried to interview her, but she doesn't remember the hike or the statement she gave." Jennifer's hope crumbled, but Garrett held up a hand. "However, there's something else. Patricia mentioned in her original statement that the man was loading materials into a truck. She even noted the color, dark green or dark blue. She wasn't certain. And she remembered something being written on the door, but she couldn't make out what it was because of mud." A work truck, Reeves said. With company markings. Exactly, Garrett confirmed. Which narrows our suspect pool considerably. We're looking for someone who owned or had access to a work truck in 1998. Someone with construction skills, and someone who knew the Blackstone Trail area intimately. Walsh pulled up a file on his laptop and turned it toward Jennifer. We've cross-referenced property owners with business licenses. There were 6 construction companies operating in this county in 1998. 3 of them have closed. The other 3 are still active. Jennifer scanned the list of names, none of them meaning anything to her. Have you interviewed the owners? We're in the process, Walsh said. But there's a complication. One of the companies, Cascade Contracting, was owned by a man named Thomas Brennan. He sold the business in 2005 and moved to Arizona. We contacted him yesterday, and he was cooperative, but he mentioned something interesting. Reeves took over. Brennan said that in the late 90s, he had a foreman who made him uncomfortable. The man was skilled, reliable, never missed work, but there was something off about him. Brennan's words were, he was too interested in the woods, always talking about the remote areas, about places where nobody ever went. This foreman would volunteer for jobs that required working in isolated locations, would sometimes disappear during lunch breaks and come back hours later with no explanation. Did Brennan fire him? Jennifer asked. No, the foreman quit in late 1998, right after your brother disappeared. Brennan found it odd at the time because the man had been talking about some upcoming project he was excited about, then suddenly gave notice and was gone within a week. Jennifer's mouth went dry. What was his name? Walsh typed on his laptop, and a driver's license photo appeared on the screen. The man in the picture was in his early 40s, with thinning brown hair, a thick mustache, and pale blue eyes that stared at the camera with an unsettling intensity. There was something wrong with his expression, something that suggested the smile didn't reach deeper than his lips. His name is Daniel Merrick, Walsh said. Born 1955, which would make him 68 now. He worked for Cascade Contracting from 1994 to 1998. After he quit, he seems to have disappeared from our records. No tax returns. No property in his name, no driver's license renewals. He became a ghost. People don't just disappear, Jennifer said. No, Reeves agreed. They don't, which means either Daniel Merrick is dead or he's living under a different name. We've sent his information to the FBI's database, flagged him as a person of interest in a federal investigation. If he's used any government services, applied for any permits, been pulled over, we'll find him. Jennifer stared at the photograph, memorizing every detail of Daniel Merrick's face. This was the man who'd taken her brother and Sarah. She was certain of it. The timeline fit perfectly. The skills matched. The behavior patterns aligned with what they knew about the killer. And something in those cold eyes suggested a capacity for the kind of patient, calculated cruelty that had been inflicted on Michael and Sarah. What about the other missing persons? She asked. Can you connect him to any of them? Garrett had already anticipated the question. He pulled out another folder, this one containing a map of the Pacific Northwest with colored pins marking locations. These are the 16 cases Agent Reeves identified. I've been cross-referencing them with Daniel Merrick's employment records. Between 1975 and 1998, Merrick worked for various construction companies throughout Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. And look at this. He traced his finger across the map, connecting the pins. 8 of them fell within 50 miles of locations where Merrick had been employed at the time of the disappearances. 8 victims, Jennifer said numbly. Possibly, Garrett cautioned. We can't prove connection yet, but the correlation is too strong to ignore. If Merrick is our perpetrator, he may have been active for over 2 decades before he took your brother and Sarah. He would have refined his methods, perfected his technique. By the time he built that chamber on Blackstone Trail, he was experienced. Jennifer thought about those carved words. They weren't the first. Somewhere in the wilderness, There might be 7 other chambers, 7 other families' answers buried beneath the earth. And Daniel Merrick knew where every single one was. "We have to find him," she said. "We will," Walsh promised. "Every law enforcement agency in 3 states is looking for him now. He can't stay hidden forever." But even as he said it, Jennifer saw the doubt in his eyes. Daniel Merrick had stayed hidden for 25 years. He'd built an underground prison within yards of a popular hiking trail, and no one had discovered it for a quarter century. He was patient, careful, and intelligent. And somewhere, right now, he might be watching the news coverage of the discovery, might be planning his next move. Or worse, Jennifer thought, he might already be gone, disappeared into the vast wilderness he knew so well, taking his secrets with him, leaving behind only the chambers and the dead to tell his story. The breakthrough came 72 hours later, though breakthrough wasn't quite the right word. Discovery, perhaps, or confirmation of horrors already suspected. Jennifer was still in Cascade Falls, having taken emergency leave from her job and rented a small apartment near the police station. She'd become a fixture in the investigation, reviewing files, making connections, doing anything that might help find Daniel Merrick. It was Reeves who called her at 2 in the morning on the 4th day after the chamber's discovery. "We found another one," the agent said without preamble. 30 miles north, near Crystal Lake. "The search teams have been combing areas where Merrick worked, and they found evidence of a second underground chamber." Jennifer was out of bed instantly, pulling on clothes with trembling hands. "Is there anyone inside?" "Yes." A pause. "Remains. 2 sets, based on preliminary assessment. The forensic team is en route." By the time Jennifer arrived at the site, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale gold that seemed obscene, given what lay beneath the earth. This chamber was in a more remote location than the first, accessible only by a rough forestry road, and then a half-mile hike through dense pine forest. Detective Walsh met her at the perimeter, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You don't have to see this, Ms. Morrison. It's going to be difficult." "I need to see it," Jennifer replied. "For them, for whoever they are." The second chamber was similar in construction to the first, but older. The timber more weathered, the concealment less sophisticated. It had taken the search team longer to excavate, and Jennifer could see why. This one had been built to last, the entrance sealed with concrete after the killer had finished with his victims. "He sealed them in," she said, horrified. "He didn't just leave them to die slowly. He sealed the entrance." "The working theory is that this was an earlier attempt," Walsh explained as they approached, "before he refined his methodology. With your brother and Sarah, he maintained the pretense of keeping them alive, visiting them, bringing supplies. But here, he simply locked them in and sealed the chamber. Death would have come faster. Days instead of weeks." Jennifer wasn't sure if that was mercy or additional cruelty. At least Michael and Sarah had light sometimes, had moments where they could hope for rescue. These victims had been buried alive in absolute darkness, knowing from the first moment that no one was coming. The forensic team had set up lights in a canopy around the chamber entrance. As Jennifer approached, she could see into the dark space below. 2 bodies lay against the far wall, or what remained of them. After decades underground, they'd been reduced to bone and scraps of clothing, but they were unmistakably human, unmistakably someone's family. "Have you identified them?" Jennifer asked. "Not yet," Reeves said, joining them. "But we found personal items. A wallet, though the leather has deteriorated badly. A woman's watch. And this." She held up an evidence bag containing a small, tarnished silver cross on a chain. Jennifer stared at the cross, and something clicked in her memory. She pulled out her phone and opened the folder of missing persons cases Reeves had given her. Scrolling through, she found the one she was looking for and held it up. "Diana Holbrook," she said, her voice shaking. Disappeared in 1989 while hiking near Crystal Lake with her boyfriend, Marcus Stein. She's wearing that cross in her missing persons photo. Reeves took the phone and compared the image to the cross in the evidence bag. The match was unmistakable, down to the small chip in the silver that Diana's mother had mentioned in her statement, a defect from when Diana had worn it as a child. "That's 9 years before Michael and Sarah," Walsh said quietly. "He was doing this for at least 9 years." "Longer," Reeves corrected, pointing to the chamber. "This construction is too confident for a first attempt. There were others before Diana and Marcus. We just haven't found them yet." As the forensic team worked, Jennifer stood at the perimeter, watching them document and recover the remains. She thought about Diana Holbrook and Marcus Stein, both 23 when they'd disappeared. They'd been hiking on a beautiful summer day, young and in love, with no idea that someone was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She thought about Diana's mother, who died in 2015 according to the case file, never knowing what had happened to her daughter. At least Jennifer would get closure, painful as it was. Mrs. Holbrook had gone to her grave with nothing but questions. "There's something else," Walsh said, pulling her from her thoughts. He handed her a tablet showing a photograph of the chamber wall. This was carved into the timber near where the bodies were found. Jennifer looked at the image and felt her blood run cold. Scratched into the wood in crude, desperate letters was a message. "He said we were practice, said he was getting better. God forgive us. DH 1989. "Practice," Jennifer whispered. "He told them they were practice." "He was refining his technique," Reeves said, her voice hard with anger. "Learning how long people could survive, what conditions produced the most fear, how to maximize their suffering. By the time he took Michael and Sarah, he'd been perfecting his method for at least a decade. They weren't just victims. They were the culmination of years of experimentation." Jennifer felt sick. The calculated nature of it, the patience, the methodical improvement of his killing technique over years. It spoke to a type of evil that was almost incomprehensible. Daniel Merrick hadn't killed in passion or rage. He'd killed as a craftsman refines his work, each victim teaching him something new, making him better at inflicting suffering. "How many?" she asked. "How many did he take before he got it right?" "We're searching," Walsh said. "Teams are covering every area where Merrick worked between 1975 and 1998. If there are more chambers, we'll find them." But even as he said it, Jennifer could see the enormity of the task. Hundreds of square miles of wilderness, decades of potential sites, and a killer who'd proven himself a master of concealment. They might never find all the victims. Some families might wait forever for answers that remained buried beneath the forest floor. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, I saw the news. Another chamber. Please tell me you're okay." Jennifer stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was she okay? She'd learned that her brother had been used as a laboratory experiment for a serial killer's refinement process. That he'd died slowly in the dark while his captor analyzed his suffering to improve his technique for the next victims. That Michael and Sarah's deaths had meant something to their killer had been valuable data in his ongoing project of perfecting human misery. No, she thought. She wasn't okay. She might never be okay again. But what she texted back was simpler. "I'm safe. They found more victims. We're getting closer to understanding what happened." Understanding. As if understanding could make this bearable. As if knowing the full scope of Daniel Merrick's depravity could somehow be comforting. The sun had fully risen now, its light filtering through the pine trees and illuminating the excavation site. Technicians moved carefully around the chamber, documenting everything, treating Diana and Marcus's remains with the reverence they deserved. Soon, they would be taken to the lab, identified through DNA, and finally returned to their families for burial. Jennifer watched them work and made a silent promise to Diana and Marcus, to Michael and Sarah, to all the victims still waiting to be found. She would see this through. She would make sure their killer was caught, that his name became synonymous with the horror he'd inflicted, that he never hurt anyone else again. And if Daniel Merrick was still alive, still out there somewhere thinking he'd gotten away with it, he was wrong. The earth was giving up his secrets. The dead were speaking. And justice, delayed by decades, was finally coming. The call came from a source no one expected. On the 7th day after the first chamber's discovery, Detective Walsh's phone rang with a blocked number. The voice on the other end was elderly, female, and frightened. "My name is Ruth Merrick," the woman said. "I'm Daniel Merrick's mother. I saw the news. I think I know where he is." Within an hour, Jennifer was sitting in the police station conference room with Walsh, Reeves, and a woman in her mid-90s who looked like she'd aged another decade in the past week. Ruth Merrick was small and frail, with papery skin and hands that trembled as she clutched a worn handbag in her lap. Her eyes, though, were sharp and filled with a terrible knowledge. "I should have called sooner," Ruth began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I couldn't bring myself to believe it. Not my Danny. Not my son." "Mrs. Merrick," Reeves said gently, "anything you can tell us will help. When did you last see Daniel?" 2 weeks ago. He comes to visit me once a month, always has. Even after he moved away, changed his name, he never missed a visit." Ruth pulled a tissue from her bag and dabbed at her eyes. "But this last visit, he was different. Agitated. Kept looking over his shoulder, checking the windows. He asked me if anyone had been asking questions about him." "Had anyone?" Walsh asked. "No, but I thought it was odd. Danny had always been so careful, so controlled. I'd never seen him nervous before." She paused, struggling with something. "When I saw the news about the chambers, about the bodies, I remembered something. Something I'd pushed away for years." Jennifer leaned forward. "What did you remember?" Ruth's hands tightened on her handbag. "When Danny was 14, our neighbor's dog disappeared. Sweet little terrier, used to play in our yard. They searched for weeks, never found it. Then one day, I was doing laundry in the basement, and I smelled something awful. I followed the smell to Danny's workshop, a little space in the corner where he liked to build things. He'd always been good with his hands." She closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her weathered cheeks. "The dog was there, in a box Danny had built. It had been there for days, starving, still alive but barely. Danny was sitting next to it, writing in a notebook, documenting how long it could survive, how its behavior changed. He told me he was conducting an experiment. He was so calm about it, like it was a science project." The room fell silent. Jennifer felt a chill run through her body. "What did you do?" Reeves asked quietly. "I should have told someone. Should have gotten him help. But he was my son, and I told myself it was just a phase, that he'd grow out of it. His father had just died, and I thought maybe he was acting out from grief." Ruth's voice cracked. "I made him promise never to hurt another animal, and he promised. He seemed genuinely sorry. So I buried the dog, and I never told anyone. It was the biggest mistake of my life." "Mrs. Merrick," Walsh said, "you said Daniel changed his name. What name is he using now?" Ruth reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He legally changed it in 1999, right after those young people disappeared. I didn't understand why at the time, thought maybe he wanted a fresh start. But now—" She handed the paper to Walsh. "He goes by David Brennan now. Lives in a cabin near the Cascade Mountain Range, about 60 miles from here." Reeves and Walsh exchanged sharp glances. "Brennan," Reeves said. "Like Thomas Brennan, his former employer." Ruth nodded miserably. "Danny always did that, borrowed pieces of other people's lives for his own. He thought it made him invisible." "Do you have an address for this cabin?" Walsh asked urgently. "Not an exact address. It's off-grid, no official records. But I've been there. He took me once, years ago. I can describe how to get there." Ruth pulled out a hand-drawn map, the lines shaky but detailed. He showed it to me like he was proud of it. Said it was his sanctuary, his place to be himself. At the time, I thought he meant peace and quiet. Now I realize what he really meant. Jennifer stared at the map, at the X marking the cabin's location. This was it. After 25 years, they'd found him. "We need to move quickly," Reeves said, already pulling out her phone. "If he's seen the news coverage, he might run. Or he might do something worse," Walsh added grimly. "If he feels cornered, if he thinks we're closing in, there's no telling what he might do." Ruth looked at Jennifer for the first time, and in her ancient eyes was a plea for understanding. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he was doing. If I'd known, if I'd suspected." "You know now," Jennifer said, her voice harder than she intended. "That's what matters. You're doing the right thing. But was it? Would it bring back Michael and Sarah, Diana and Marcus, or any of the others? Would it erase the years of suffering, the terror, the darkness? No amount of justice could undo what Daniel Merrick had done, but at least it could stop him from doing it again. Within 2 hours, a tactical team was assembled. The cabin was in a remote area accessible only by forestry roads, surrounded by dense wilderness. It was the perfect location for someone who wanted to disappear, who wanted privacy for whatever dark work he might be continuing. "We don't know if he's armed," the team leader briefed them. "We don't know if he has any additional victims being held. We're going in assuming worst-case scenario. Our priorities are apprehension if possible, neutralization if necessary, and rescue of any potential victims." Jennifer wasn't allowed to go with them. She argued, pleaded, but Walsh was firm. "This is a tactical operation. Civilians aren't permitted, especially not family members of victims. I'm sorry, Ms. Morrison, but you'll have to wait here." So she waited, paced the conference room, drank terrible coffee, watched the clock tick away seconds, then minutes, then hours. Ruth Merrick had been taken to a hotel under police protection, both for her safety and because no one was certain yet what role she might have played in her son's crimes beyond willful blindness. Emma called 3 times. Jennifer couldn't bring herself to answer. What would she say? That they'd found the killer, that he was being apprehended, that it was almost over? She didn't believe it herself. Even if they took Daniel Merrick alive, even if he confessed to everything, it would never be over. The horror would live on in the families who'd lost someone, in the documented suffering in Sarah's journal, in the knowledge that such evil could exist and go undetected for decades. When Walsh's call finally came, 5 hours after the team had departed, Jennifer's hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. "We're at the cabin," Walsh said, his voice tight. "Merrick is dead. Self-inflicted gunshot wound. We found him in the main room sitting in a chair. He'd been watching the news coverage on a laptop." Jennifer's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the phone pressed to her ear. "Is he really dead? You're certain?" "Yes, forensics is processing the scene now. But Ms. Morrison, there's more. The cabin, it's full of evidence, photographs, journals, maps. He documented everything. Every victim, every chamber, every moment of their captivity. We're looking at potentially 16 to 20 victims over a 40-year period. 20 victims." Jennifer tried to process the number but couldn't. Each one was a person, a family, a lifetime of grief. "He left a note," Walsh continued, "addressed to whoever found him. He knew we were coming. He'd been following the news coverage, knew about the chambers being discovered. The note says he won't give us the satisfaction of a trial, won't let us turn him into a spectacle. His exact words were, 'I finished my work, now I'm finishing myself.'" "His work," Jennifer said bitterly. "He called it work. There's one more thing. Among his papers, we found a list, names and dates. Every person he took, including some we hadn't identified yet. He kept meticulous records. We'll be able to notify families, give them closure." Walsh paused. "Michael and Sarah are on the list, Ms. Morrison, along with detailed notes about their captivity. If you want to read them, to understand everything that happened, we'll make that available to you. But I should warn you, it's extremely disturbing." Jennifer closed her eyes. Did she want to know every detail of her brother's suffering? Every thought that had gone through his mind as he died? Every moment of terror Sarah had documented in her journal, and more that she couldn't. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The investigation will continue for months as we identify all the victims and notify their families. We'll be in touch." After Walsh hung up, Jennifer sat on the conference room floor for a long time, staring at nothing. Daniel Merrick was dead. The man who'd tortured and killed her brother, who'd destroyed so many lives, who'd spent decades perfecting his craft of inflicting suffering, was gone. He'd taken the coward's way out, denying the families their day in court, their chance to face him and speak for their dead. But he was gone. That was something. Not justice, exactly, but an ending. The chambers would be excavated. The victims would be identified and returned to their families. The secret would be exposed, the darkness dragged into light. Jennifer pulled out her phone and finally called Emma back. "Mom?" Her daughter's voice was thick with worry. "Are you okay? I've been calling for hours." "They found him," Jennifer said. "The man who killed Uncle Michael and Sarah. He's dead." Emma was silent for a moment. "How do you feel?" How did she feel? Empty, mostly. Exhausted. Relieved that it was over, angry that she'd never get to ask him why, sad that knowing the truth hadn't brought the peace she'd hoped for. All of it, none of it, everything at once. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think I need to come home, need to see you. Can you come to Portland for a few days?" "I'll get on a flight tonight," Emma said immediately. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart." Jennifer ended the call and slowly got to her feet. Through the conference room window, she could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks obscured by clouds. Somewhere in that wilderness were chambers she'd never see, victims she'd never meet, secrets still waiting to be discovered. But Michael and Sarah could rest now. They could finally be brought home. It wasn't the ending she'd wanted, but it was the ending they had. And somehow, she would find a way to live with that. The identification process took 3 weeks. Jennifer remained in Cascade Falls for most of it, unable to leave until Michael and Sarah could come home. The forensic anthropology team worked with quiet efficiency, treating each set of remains with reverence, understanding that these bones represented not just evidence, but someone's child, someone's beloved, someone's whole world. Detective Walsh had been right about Daniel Merrick's records. The cabin had yielded a horrifying archive spanning 4 decades, 17 victims in total, though they suspected there might be more that Merrick hadn't documented or that remained undiscovered in the vast wilderness. The oldest case dated back to 1978, a solo hiker named James Kirby who disappeared near Mount Rainier. The most recent, before Michael and Sarah, had been in 1995. Each victim had a file. Photographs documenting their captivity, detailed notes about their psychological and physical deterioration, even audio recordings in the later cases. Merrick had treated his crimes as a scientific endeavor, meticulously cataloging human suffering as if it were data to be analyzed and learned from. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had never seen anything quite like it. This combination of organized serial killing and clinical observation. Jennifer had declined to view most of the evidence related to Michael and Sarah. She'd read Sarah's journal, knew how they'd died. She didn't need to see her brother's face in those final days. Didn't need to hear his voice weakened by dehydration and despair. Some images, once seen, could never be unseen. She'd already carry enough nightmares for the rest of her life. But she attended every family notification meeting. As Walsh and Reeves contacted the relatives of other victims, Jennifer was there, a silent witness to their grief. She watched as they went through the same progression she had: disbelief, horror, anguish, and finally, a kind of terrible relief that came with knowing. Not peace exactly, but the end of wondering. The family of Diana Holbrook and Marcus Stein wept when they learned their children had been found. Diana's sister, now in her 60s, clutched Jennifer's hand and thanked her repeatedly, as if Jennifer had been personally responsible for the discovery, rather than simply another grieving relative who'd happened to be there when the earth gave up its secrets. 34 years, the sister whispered. 34 years I've waited. My mother died not knowing. My father drank himself to death over it, and now, finally, we can bury her properly. Finally, we can say goodbye. That was the refrain Jennifer heard over and over. Finally. The word carried so much weight, so much accumulated grief and frustrated hope. Finally, the waiting was over. Finally, they could mourn properly. Finally, they could begin to heal. The media coverage was intense and unrelenting. The case had everything journalists craved: a decades-long mystery, a cunning serial killer, underground chambers hidden in scenic wilderness. Cable news devoted entire segments to it. Podcasts sprang up overnight. Reddit threads exploded with amateur detectives analyzing every detail. Daniel Merrick's face was everywhere, his dead eyes staring out from television screens and newspaper front pages. Jennifer hated it, hated how they turned her brother's suffering into entertainment, how they speculated about his final moments, how they transformed a human tragedy into content to be consumed. But she understood it too. People needed to believe that monsters were recognizable, that evil had a face they could point to and say, that's what it looks like. It made them feel safer, made them believe they could spot danger before it struck. The truth was more frightening. Daniel Merrick had been ordinary. His co-workers had described him as quiet but competent. His neighbors remembered him as polite, if private. His mother had loved him. He'd had no criminal record before the killings, no warning signs that anyone in authority had noticed. He'd been a functional psychopath, capable of mimicking normal human behavior while harboring desires that were anything but normal. On a gray morning in late November, almost exactly 25 years after Michael and Sarah had disappeared, their remains were released to the family. Jennifer arranged for cremation, as she'd done for her parents years earlier. A memorial service was scheduled for the following week, finally giving family and friends a chance to say goodbye, to speak the words they'd been holding for a quarter century. Emma arrived from Boston the night before the service, and Jennifer held her daughter close, grateful for the warmth of living arms, the steady rhythm of a beating heart. "I keep thinking about all the time that was stolen from them," Jennifer said as they sat together in her apartment. Michael never got to get married, have children, grow old. Sarah never finished her thesis, never became the scientist she wanted to be. They were robbed of 50 years of life. But they had each other, Emma said softly. Even at the end, they weren't alone. That's something, isn't it? Jennifer supposed it was. In Sarah's final journal entry, barely legible, she'd written that Michael had held her hand as they drifted toward death. They'd told each other stories from their childhood, remembered happy times, said the words, "I love you," until they no longer had the strength to speak. They'd faced the darkness together. The memorial service was held at a small church in Portland, the same one where Jennifer's parents had been eulogized. More than 100 people attended, some who'd known Michael and Sarah, others who'd participated in the original search, and still others who simply felt compelled to pay their respects to victims of such incomprehensible cruelty. Jennifer spoke, though she barely remembered what she said. Something about Michael's kindness, Sarah's brilliant mind, the future they should have had. She introduced other family members of Merrick's victims who'd made the journey, united in their grief. Diana Holbrook's sister spoke about the importance of never giving up hope, even when hope seemed foolish. Marcus Stein's brother talked about the need to remember victims as they lived, not as they died. After the service, as people filed out into the weak November sunlight, Detective Walsh approached Jennifer. "I wanted you to know," he said. "The search teams have completed their survey of areas where Merrick worked. We've found 2 more chambers. Both contained remains. We're in the process of identification. 19 victims. Maybe more still waiting to be discovered." Jennifer nodded slowly, processing this information. "Will it ever end?" she asked. "Will we ever know the full scope of what he did?" "Probably not," Walsh admitted. "But we'll keep looking. Every family deserves answers, just like yours did." Jennifer watched as other mourners embraced, shared tears, offered comfort. A community of grief, bound together by one man's evil, but also by their capacity to endure, to support each other, to find meaning in tragedy. "Thank you," she said to Walsh, "for not giving up, for finding them." "I wish we'd found them sooner," he replied. "I wish we'd caught him before he could hurt anyone else." "We can't change the past," Jennifer said, the words feeling both inadequate and profound. "We can only honor it, remember it, and make sure it's not forgotten." As she drove home that evening, Emma beside her, Jennifer felt something shift inside her. The weight of not knowing, the burden she'd carried for 25 years, had been replaced by something different. The weight of knowing was heavy too, but it was a weight that could be borne. The truth, however terrible, was something she could hold, could process, could eventually learn to live with. Michael and Sarah's ashes sat in urns on her mantel, finally home. She would scatter them in the spring, she decided, somewhere beautiful and peaceful, somewhere they would have loved. Not in the mountains where they died, but somewhere else, somewhere untainted by darkness. The nightmare was over. The long wait had ended. Now came the harder part, learning to live in a world where she knew exactly what had happened, where there were no more mysteries to solve, only grief to process and memories to cherish. But she would do it. For Michael and Sarah, for all the victims and their families, and for herself. She would survive. She would remember, and she would make sure that the world remembered too. 5 years later, the trail was busy on this October morning. Hikers passing by in pairs and small groups, enjoying the autumn colors and crisp mountain air. Jennifer Morrison sat on a bench near the 7th-mile marker of Blackstone Trail, a small bronze plaque mounted on the wooden backrest behind her. "In memory of Michael Morrison and Sarah Chen, and all those lost in these mountains, may they find peace." The plaque had been her idea, approved by the Forestry Service after much deliberation. It didn't mention how Michael and Sarah had died, didn't reference the horror that had unfolded beneath this ground. It simply acknowledged that they'd been here, that their lives had mattered, that they wouldn't be forgotten. The chambers had all been filled in, sealed, and the earth allowed to reclaim them. The locations were still marked on Forestry Service maps, but only officials knew exactly where they were. It seemed wrong to leave them as they were, as shrines to suffering. Better to let the forest heal, let the scars fade, even if the memory remained. Jennifer came here twice a year now, on the anniversary of Michael's birthday and on the day he disappeared. She never stayed long, just sat quietly and remembered. Not the end, though she knew it now in all its terrible detail, but the beginning and the middle. The brother who taught her to ride a bike, who'd walked her down the aisle at her wedding, who'd made terrible jokes and given the best hugs and loved with his whole heart. "Mom." Jennifer looked up to see Emma approaching with a little girl clutching her hand. Her granddaughter, 3 years old, with Michael's dark hair and curious eyes. "We brought flowers," Emma said, and the child held up a small bouquet of wild flowers, proud of her contribution. "Those are beautiful, Michaela," Jennifer said, taking the flowers from her namesake. Together, they placed them at the base of the memorial bench, adding to the small collection that other visitors had left. Some people knew the story, made pilgrimages to honor the victims. Others simply saw the plaque and felt moved to leave a token of remembrance. As little Michaela ran ahead on the trail, Emma sat down beside Jennifer. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," Jennifer said, and meant it. The grief had evolved over the years, transformed from a sharp, constant pain into something more manageable, a sadness that surfaced at unexpected moments, but no longer defined every day. I was thinking about the support group meeting last week. The support group had been Jennifer's initiative, started 2 years after the chambers were discovered. It brought together families of Merrick's victims, offering a space to share their experiences, their grief, their complicated feelings about closure. Not everyone attended, some families preferring to move on in private, but those who did come found comfort in being understood by others who'd walked the same dark path. "How's it going?" Emma asked. "Good. Hard, but good. We're planning a memorial event next spring on what would have been Sarah's 50th birthday, a scholarship in her name for environmental science students." Jennifer smiled slightly. She would have liked that. Something positive coming from all this. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Michaela examine pine cones and point excitedly at a squirrel. Life continued. That was perhaps the most profound lesson Jennifer had learned. Even after unimaginable tragedy, even after discovering the worst of what humans could do to each other, life continued. Children were born. Seasons changed. Beauty persisted. "Do you think about him?" Emma asked quietly. "Merrick?" Jennifer considered the question. She'd spent countless hours in therapy processing her feelings about Daniel Merrick, trying to understand how someone became capable of such sustained cruelty. The answer, ultimately, was that she couldn't understand. Not really. His psychology was so fundamentally different from hers that true comprehension was impossible. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I try not to give him too much space in my head. He took enough from our family. He doesn't get to take any more." It was easier said than done, of course. The nightmares still came occasionally, and certain triggers, news stories about missing hikers, true crime podcasts, even the smell of pine trees on humid days could send her spiraling back to that conference room where she'd first learned the truth. But she'd learned to manage it, to acknowledge the trauma without letting it consume her. The FBI had eventually published a detailed report on the case, used in training for behavioral analysts and missing persons investigators. Jennifer had participated in several conferences, speaking about the family perspective, advocating for better resources for cold case investigations. If Michael and Sarah's story could help solve other cases, help bring other families closure, then perhaps some meaning could be wrested from the horror. "I should get Michaela home for her nap," Emma said, standing. "Want to come back with us? I'm making that pasta dish Uncle Michael used to love." Jennifer smiled, remembering. Michael had been passionate about food, always trying new recipes, always insisting that cooking was an expression of love. She'd kept his recipe cards, yellowed and stained with use, and passed them on to Emma. Another way of keeping him alive, keeping his presence woven into the fabric of their daily lives. "I'd like that," Jennifer said. As they walked back toward the parking area, little Michaela between them, Jennifer glanced back once at the memorial bench. The sun had shifted, illuminating the bronze plaque, making it gleam among the shadows. Other hikers would pass by today, tomorrow, for years to come. Some would read the plaque and pause, offering a moment of silence for people they'd never known. Others would rest on the bench without noticing the memorial at all, simply enjoying the view and the peace of the wilderness. Both were appropriate, Jennifer thought. Michael and Sarah deserved to be remembered and honored. But they also would have wanted people to find joy in these mountains, to experience the beauty that had drawn them here in the first place. The wilderness wasn't evil. The trees and trails and sky hadn't hurt them. One man had done that, and he was gone, his ashes scattered in an unmarked location, his name eventually to be forgotten by all but those who studied the darkest aspects of human nature. But Michael and Sarah would be remembered. In the scholarship that bore Sarah's name, in the little girl who carried Michael's name and his smile, in the memorial bench where strangers paused to honor people they'd never met, in Jennifer's heart, where they lived still, not as victims but as the vibrant, loving people they'd been. The parking lot came into view, and Jennifer felt Emma squeeze her arm. "Love you, Mom. Love you too, sweetheart." They drove away from Blackstone Trail, leaving the mountains behind for now. But Jennifer would return. She always did, would always do. Because this was where Michael and Sarah's story had ended, but also where their memory persisted, carved not in timber buried beneath the earth, but in bronze under the open sky, in daylight where it belonged. The vanishing had become a finding. The mystery had been solved. And though the answers were more terrible than anyone could have imagined, there was strange comfort in knowing. The not knowing, Jennifer had learned, was its own kind of death. At least now, finally, she could live. The forest remained. The trail continued. And on a bench near mile marker 7, flowers left by strangers caught the autumn breeze, a small tribute to lives stolen, and remembering persisted. Some disappearances, Jennifer had learned, were never really solved. Questions remained. Doubts lingered. But Michael and Sarah had been found, brought home, laid to rest with dignity and love. In a world where so many vanished without trace, where so many families waited in vain for closure, that was something. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales against 25 years of suffering and loss. But it was what they had. And somehow, impossibly, Jennifer had learned to make it sufficient. The mountains receded in the rear-view mirror, their peaks touching the sky, their secrets finally told. And Jennifer Morrison drove toward home, toward life, toward the future that Michael and Sarah never got to have but would have wanted for her, toward healing, however imperfect, toward peace, however fragile, toward the simple, profound act of continuing to live, to love, to remember. That, in the end, was the only justice she could give them, and so she did.